First Opium War is fought between China and the Western power, forcing China to import British opium. Britain won the war and as a result gained control over Hong Kong by the 1842's Treaty of Nanking. 1853. American Commodore Matthew Perry arrives in Tokyo Harbor and sets a one-year delay for the Bakushu to allow trade with American merchants, with threat of military actions. He comes back in 1854 and signs the Kanagawa Convention, thus showing the weaknesses Tokugawa shogunate. (1856) The outbreak of the Second Opium War in China, resulting in the Treaty of Tianjin of 1858. Paving the way to what would be known as the Unequal Treaties, and most importantly, burning, looting of both the old and new summer palaces. Beyond any doubt, by 1860, ancient civilization that was China had been thoroughly defeated and humiliated by the West. 1858. The Western nations forces Japan to sign the Unequal Treaties. These articles established export and import tariffs and the concept of extraterritoriality. Japan had no power to change these terms. 1868. In an effort to modernize and prevent future Western dominance, the daimyos of Satsuma and Choshu ally themselves to the imperial forces and ousts the Tokugawa shogunate during the Boshin War. Then they crowned Mutsuhito as the new Meiji emperor. The next few decades see arguably the most rapid and successful industrialization of any economy in world history during the Meiji Restoration. The Southern Expansion Doctrine, or Nanshin-Ron policy, came to be advanced with Southeast Asia as a focus for trade and immigration. 1894 to 1895. The First Sino-Japanese War, which ended in a Japanese victory, results in Japanese dominance in Korea and Japanese control of Liaodong Peninsula, Formosa and Penghu Island under the terms of the Treaty of Shimonoseki. The balance of power in Asia is now permanently altered. With the war end, Ukoshin-Ron, or Northern Expansion Doctrine, came to dominate Japanese foreign policy. 1899. With its newly gained power from the recent industrialization, Japan successfully renegotiates aspects of the unequal treaties. (1899 to 1901). The Boxer Rebellion led China to a humiliating defeat by the eight-nation alliance of Western powers, including the United States and Japan, losing more territory to said powers and dealing one of the final blows to the struggling Qing dynasty. (1904 to 1905), the Russo-Japanese Wars begins with a surprise attack and ends by an eventual Japanese victory over Imperial Russia. Japanese control over Korea until World War II is assured. (1910). The Empire of Japan formally annexed Korea in Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty. (1911). The Chinese Revolution overthrows the Manchu Qing dynasty and establishes the Republic of China. The Chinese revolutionary leader Sun Yat-sen declared a republic in Nanjing in January 1912. But to avoid bloodshed, he came to a compromise with the military, agreeing to accept the imperial prime minister Yuan Shikai as a president if he could bring about the abdication of Puyi the emperor. Yuan successfully did so, peacefully ending the Chinese Empire, and was made provisional president of the Republic of China in Beiping in March. (1914). During the Great War, Japan joined the Allies against the German Kaiserliche Marine in the West Pacific, Indian Ocean, and performed escort duty in the Mediterranean against the Austro-Hungarian Kaiserliche und Königliche Marine submarines. July 1917. Following the death of Yuan Shikai, the northern government begins to fracture into two rival factions. The Hanoi clique, which supported Premier Minister Duan Qirui, and the Zili clique, which rallied behind Vice President Feng Guozhang. Duan wanted China to enter World War I on the side of the Allies and militarily suppress the rebellious southern provinces. while Feng initially opposed the entry into the war and wanted to peacefully resolve the southern conflict. August through November 1917. Yuan Shikai's successor, Yuan Qirui, failed to retake the south or rein in the growing power of rival factions in the north. Opposition to his desire to join World War I caused such chaos that royalists were able to briefly seize Beijing. His entry into the war gave him Japanese support, but only a few months later, the Russian Revolution broke out, bringing even more instability to the east. (1919) The May 4th movement erupts in Beijing to protest the Chinese government's weak response to the Treaty of Versailles. After the end of World War I, Japan, as a member of the victorious Entente, is invited to share the former German colonial empire possessions in the Far East. Thus, it gains mandate over the most of the Micronesian archipelagos, including the Marshall Islands, Marianas, the Carolines, Palau, and Truk Lagoon, which came under the administration of the Imperial Japanese Navy. However, it misses the opportunity to seize Nauru and the northeastern part of New Guinea, which are given to Australia, as well as the Samoas, which are occupied by the New Zealandian Expeditionary Force since 1914. With this island group, the Nanshin Ron had a profound impact in Japanese policy. The focus of the Southern Expansion Doctrine expanded to include these archipelagos, the economic and military development of which came to be viewed as an essential to Japan's security. As part of the Treaty of Versailles, Japan, along with the United Kingdom and 40 other countries, became the founding member of the League of Nations. July 1920. Since 1917, Yuan Qirui and his Hanui clique had dominated the unstable Beiyang government. However, Yuan's dependence on Japan had made him unpopular with the people, and his attempt to reunify China had aroused fear in the rival factions. The most powerful of these factions were the Zili and Fengtian cliques. Soon, they both denounced him and make an alliance to overthrow his government. They later succeed and form the coalition government between the two cliques. February 1921. Ungern von Sternberg, a white Russian general fleeing the Soviet advance, took advantage of the Chinese weakness to occupy Mongolia, with aspirations to restore the Great Mongol Empire. His rule, however, would only last a few months before the Soviet and Mongolian forces expelled him. The Soviets, looking to expand their revolution, quickly filled the gap, and their influence in the country would last until the very end of the Soviet Empire. April to June 1922. After 2 years of uneasy coalition government, the tension emerges and, unsurprisingly, the war broke out between the Zili and Fengtian cliques. The Zili clique, backed by the Britain and the US, win the war, while the Fengtian, backed by the Japanese, retreats to Manchuria. 1922. The Washington Naval Treaty is signed, limiting the fleet and vessel of the navies of the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, France, and Italy. Japan is limited of about 2/3 of the fleet allowed for the United States and Britain. However, it does not limit the development of port facilities in the Pacific area, which Japan had already secretly begun fortifying, like Palau, Tinian, and Saipan. This was seen by Japanese naval and army officers as a denial of Japanese equality amongst European powers. Many in the Japanese armed forces were convinced that Japan's problems, such as the explosion of population, unemployment, and future security, can be assured through expansion. The expansionists sought access to food, oil, and other raw materials, and these can be achieved only through military conquests. Many military officers were also increasingly disgusted with Japan's civilian government, which seemed to be corrupted and outrageous. September to November 1924. The Second Zili-Fengtian War breaks out. This time, the Japanese-backed Fengtian clique appears to be victorious, with the help of the defected Zili warlord Feng Yuqiang of Guominjun. To balance the interests of the Guominjun and Fengtian cliques, the new provisional government prime minister was Hanui clique's Duan Qirui. 1924. The first Congress of the Kuomintang is held under Sun Yat-sen authority. This first Congress eventually led to the formation of the First United Front, an alliance between Kuomintang and the Communist Party of China, with the objective to end warlordism in China. Together, they formed the National Revolutionary Army. 1925. Dr. Sun Yat-sen dies in Beijing after internal political intrigues, primarily against Wang Jingmei. Chiang Kai-shek takes over the leadership of the Kuomintang. November 1925 to April 1926. Anti-Fengtian War. Despite their cooperation in seizing the Beiyang government in 1924, the friendship between the Guominjun and the Fengtian clique was short-lived. The Guominjun encouraged the defection of a Fengtian commander who almost took Mukden, the Fengtian capital, only to be pushed back when Japan stepped in. With Japanese and Zili support, the Fengtian clique struck back, defeating the Guominjun and seizing Beiping. Then, the head warlord of the Fengtian clique, Zhang Zuiliang, personally took charge of the government as a dictator. 1926. The first phase of the Northern Expedition was launched by the National Revolutionary Army against the Beiyang government and other regional warlords. In Japan, the 124th Emperor, Crown Prince Hirohito, assumed the throne upon the death of his father, Yoshihito. (1927) The Shanghai Massacre. Open conflict between the Chinese Communists and the Kuomintang forces commences in Shanghai, which marked the end of the First United Front and the start of the Chinese Civil War. 1928. The second phase of the Northern Expedition began in January, and by April, the nationalist forces had advanced to the Yellow River, with the assistance of allied warlords including Yang Qishan and Feng Yuqiang. Nationalist forces secured a series of decisive victories against the Beiyang army. As they approached Beijing, Zhang Zuolin, leader of the Manchuria-based Fengtian clique, was forced to flee and was assassinated shortly thereafter by the Japanese. His son, Zhang Quiliang, took over and, in December, had announced that Manchuria would accept the authority of the nationalist government in Nanjing. With the final peace of China under the Kuomintang control, the Northern Expedition concluded successfully and China was reunified, heralding the start of the Nanjing Decade. (1929) The Sino-Soviet conflict over the Manchurian-Chinese Eastern Railway demonstrated the military weaknesses of the Republic of China. Later, the Soviet Union sold its stock to the Manchukuo government. (1930) The Central Plain War. Despite the claim to unity, Chiang Kai-shek's hold over China was tenuous. In 1930, Yang Zishan, the Kuomintang and the Guangxi clique turned against him in the Central Plains War. It was the largest armed conflict in the Warlords Era, considerably weakening the Northeast Army, thus reducing the garrison of Manchuria, making the region an easy prey for the conflicts to come. September 18, 1931. The Mukden Incident. Japanese agents blew up part of the Japanese-owned South Manchurian Railroad at Mukden in northeast China and labeled it sabotage by Chinese forces. Using the incident as a pretext, the Japanese invasion of Manchuria is launched. Within 6 months, the occupation of Manchuria is complete. January 28, 1932. A new incident breaks the fragile peace in China, as Chinese boycotter and Japanese troops protecting the Japanese section of Shanghai fights. The Japanese dispatch a naval invasion force in an attempt to capture Shanghai. However, the invasion ended in a stalemate. United Kingdom and United States broker a ceasefire between China and Japan 3 months after the hostilities began. February 1932. Manchukuo is announced as an independent nation. In fact, a Japanese puppet controlling Manchuria. It encompassed the 3 northeastern Chinese provinces occupied by Japan since the Mukden incident. The last Manchu emperor of China, Puyi, was declared a regent and later enthroned as emperor in 1934. However, Japanese control is still well established. Japanese-owned interests gain considerable power. Additionally, the opium trade is encouraged. Manchukuo was not recognized by the League of Nations. Subsequently, Japan withdrew from the organization. May 1932. The 15th of this month, The Japanese Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi is assassinated by a group of young officers for his support of the London Naval Treaty, which is seen in Japan as preventing parity of forces. January 1934. The Soviet Union invades the Republic of China in the Soviet invasion of Xinjiang. October 1934 to November 1935. The Chinese Communists, led by Mao Zedong, conduct the Long March, retreating from Jiangxi to Yan'an in Shenqi to evade the pursuit of the Kuomintang army after the defeat in the Chinese Civil War in Jiangxi. The success of the Long March cemented Mao Zedong as the main leader of the Communist Party of China. December 1934. Japan abrogates the Washington Naval Treaty. December 1935. Large-scale anti-Japanese riots take place in Beijing. In Japan, the Nanshin Run became the official policy, with the objectives of extending its influence in the Pacific, but excluded areas such as the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies and Java, which might provoke other countries. February 1936. On the 26th of February 1936, Japanese young army officer of the Kodo-ha faction, which favored Ukoshin-ron, launched an unsuccessful coup attempt against the government and military leadership of their rivals factions, Tozai-ha. The uprising leaders were executed and imprisoned, resulting in the Kodo-ha faction losing its influence within the army, and the military increased its control over the civilian government. November 1936. Japan joins Germany in signing the Anti-Comintern Pact, concluded to provide a two-front threat to the Soviet Union. Japan is however not interested in being drawn into a European war, and thus the pact is not a true alliance. December 25th, 1936. The Qihan Incident. The leader of Northeast China, Zhang Zuiliang, kidnapped Chiang Kai-shek in Qian, hoping to force an end to the conflict between the Kuomintang forces and the Chinese Communists. To secure the release of Chiang, the Kuomintang agreed to a temporary end to the Chinese Civil War, and on December 24th, the creation of a united front between the Kuomintang forces and the Chinese Communists against Japan. The 7th of July 1937. The Marco Polo Bridge Incident. Japanese forces conducting military exercise outside Peking claimed that several Japanese soldiers were not accounted for after the exercise. The Japanese forces launch an all-out assault. Nanking government declares its intent to resist Japan, marking the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. August to November 1937. Full-scale fighting erupts throughout northern China, and Japan overcomes initial failures with landings and reinforcements in Shanghai. Before the Battle of Shanghai, the Tokyo government announced that Japan would complete the conquest of Shanghai in 3 days and all of China within 3 months. However, the Kuomintang troops held Shanghai for over 3 months. December 1937, the Nanjing Massacre. That city is captured and subjected to 6 weeks of rampage. The Nanjing Massacre resulted in the deaths of between 100 and 200,000 Chinese civilians. This is in line with Prince Asaka's 3 alls policy: kill all, burn all, loot all. April 1938. Chinese nationalists gain a major victory over Japanese forces in the Shantung province. June 1938. The Japanese forces' advance along the Yellow River is halted by the breaking of the dam by the Chinese forces. The surprise flood kills many Japanese soldiers, but also results in a catastrophic number of casualties, up to 1 million Chinese civilians. July 1938. The Japanese forces push for a battle with the Soviet forces at Lake Hassan in the Manchukuo. The Soviets handily defeat the Japanese. October 1938. The Japanese Central China Army captures Hankow, ending their advance up the Yangtze River. Landings near Hong Kong capture Canton, cutting off the Chinese nationalists from ocean ports. November 1938. The new order for East Asia is declared by Japan. This declaration of Japanese plans for dominance of East Asia further deteriorates their relations with Western nations. February 1939. Japan captures Hainan Island, which is seen to have strategic implication by the British. May to September 1939. Japan and the Soviet Union engage in the border clashes around the Khalkha River in Mongolia, culminating in the battles of Halkingol. Crushing defeats lead the Strike North group to avoid conflict against the powerful Red Army, and sobered Japanese military commanders about prospects for expansion to the north. Japan learned a few things about the prospect of northern expansion. Invading the Soviet Union was going to be way harder than they thought. The Japanese army were not good with tank warfare. The Kadoha faction suddenly suggesting an attack on the South and East Asia seemed a lot more appealing to higher ups. October 1939. After Chinese victory in Changsha, and with Japan's line of communications stretched deep into the Chinese interior, the war reached a stalemate. The Japanese were also unable to defeat the Chinese Communist forces in Jiangxi, who waged a campaign of sabotage and guerrilla warfare against the invaders. While Japan ruled the largest cities, they lacked sufficient manpower to control China's vast countryside. November 1939. Chinese nationalist forces launched a large-scale winter offensive. Although Chinese forces failed to meet the objective, the Japanese were defeated in Suiyuan and Henan. The triumph of Germany in the West Front in the spring of 1940 had a dramatic effect on Japanese strategic thinking. In July 1940, the civilian government was replaced by a more aggressive cabinet, led by Prime Minister Prince Konoe Fumimaro and Minister of War General Gojo Hideki. By this time, the military had almost complete control of Japanese government. The new cabinet's goals were, firstly, to pursue an alliance with Germany and the Axis powers. Secondly, to seize China. In China, Japan faced continued resistance during 1940 from both Chiang Kai-shek forces and the Chinese communists. General Tojo reasoned that a move to the south against Western colonial possessions would help Japan subdue China by cutting off Chiang's external supplies. It decided to push southward into Southeast Asia for the expansion of the empire. It would also provide needed raw material for Japan. This planned push to the south required Japan to reach a non-aggression pact with the Soviets and prepare for a conflict with the United States and Great Britain. War games conducted in May 1940 showed Japan could prevail in a short conflict with the United States, but might lose a long one. That war would be a great strategy game. The Japanese Foreign Minister Matsuoka Yosuke formally announced the concept of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere on 1st of August 1940. Co-Prosperity Sphere was an evolved Nanshin-Ron doctrine, in which comprising the area of Japan, Manchukuo, China, and parts of Southeast Asia, that would, accordingly to imperial propaganda, establish a new international order seeking co-prosperity for Asian countries, which would share prosperity and peace, free from Western colonialism and domination. However, in reality, Japanese motivation was a resources-rich area of Southeast Asia in which to provide raw material for Japan's industry. Furthermore, the Pacific Ocean was to become a Japanese lake. September 1940. Japan invades Vichy France colony of Indochina. In late 1940, Minister of War General Tojo Hideki linked Japan with the Axis powers in the Tripartite Pact. Each member pledged to support the other in a war against the United States. In April 1941, Japan and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, indicating that Japan had chosen the Southern strategy. Japan and the United States inched closer to conflict. of June 1931. Germany invades the Soviet Union in what became known as Operation Barbarossa. August 1941. The United States, which at the time supplied 80% of Japanese oil imports, initiates a complete oil embargo. Great Britain and the Netherlands fall out. In Japan, suddenly found itself cut off from 90% of its oil supplies. This threatens to cripple both the Japanese economy and military strength once the strategic reserves run dry, unless alternative oil sources can be found. September 1941. The Japanese government decided that it would be ready for war by late October. October 1941. Prime Minister Konoe resigned, and Minister of War General Dojo Hideki assumed power. Diplomatic overtures continued as Japan offered to withdraw from Indochina and parts of China if the United States would not interfere with sino-Japanese peace negotiations, and if it would normalize trade relations with Japan and support the Japanese acquisition of Dutch East Indies. The Japanese government sets a deadline of November 25, 1941 for progress in the talks. Roosevelt knew that this was an important date. Because the US government expected an attack, he was less interested in negotiating. Although the American military position was weak, Roosevelt rejected the Japanese proposals and demanded Japanese withdrawal from China. By the end of October, the Japanese High Command had finalized its war plan for the Southern Campaign. It has identified the first set of objectives as the Philippines, Pearl Harbor, and Malaya, with subsidiary operations against Hong Kong, Wake Island, and Guam. The Dutch East Indies would have to wait for a later conquest. All these objectives should be secure within 150 days. November the 26th, the 1st Japanese Airstrike Group, also known as Kidobutai, set sail in the Northern Pacific. Its objective was none other than striking the US Navy base at Pearl Harbor. December 4, 1941. A large invasion fleet left from the Hainan island of Saigon. Its objective was Malaya and Thailand. December 7 and 8, 1941. Japan launched its centrifugal offensive, starting with the invasion of Malaya and striking Pearl Harbor 70 minutes later. Shortly, Thailand, Hong Kong, Guam, and the Philippines followed. The United States, the Netherlands, and United Kingdom formally declares war on Japan the next day.